Hey there, and welcome back into Integrative Health Simplified podcast. I am so glad that you're here. We are continuing in this series on women's health, fact or fiction. And if you have not listened to some of the previous episodes, we have just talked about a lot of different subjects as it pertains to women's health. And I'm really excited to talk about this particular one, and that is just hormonal changes. Like, as we get older, what is normal? Because I think a lot of times we can fear what's going to happen, like menopause, perimenopause, whatever different changes come with that. And it can be really overwhelming and confusing and just kind of disheartening. Like, we don't want to get any older, right? And so I want to just share some things with you today. So hopefully you'll just be a little bit more knowledgeable around what's going to happen and less fearful. I certainly don't want you to be scared about what's going to happen, because you want it to happen, right? We want to live to be older, and this is just a normal process of aging as a woman. And so let's kind of dive into what this looks like. I think first is it will be good to just have a good average on age ranges and the different stages of menopause, or perimenopause, really leading up to. And so before I talk about the ranges and some different things that happen within these ranges, I think it's good to note that these are averages. I am just giving you the averages on these age ranges. That doesn't mean that something's wrong with you if you're not within this range. And a lot of times what has happened in our past, as far as, if we've had a lot of stress and trauma and just like, all of those types of things happening, sometimes that can push us into these stages earlier. And so don't feel like you're broken or anything like that if this age range that I'm going to share doesn't really fit where you're at. So the first phase would be the very, very beginning of perimenopause, would be about 39 to 44. And so this is when a lot of things just kind of start to shift. Maybe you won't be able to snap back like you used to. A lot of the things that you were previously doing, maybe like workout or eating wise, etc., they just won't really work anymore. This is because our hormones are starting to shift, like DHEA, cortisol, the way our body regulates insulin, progesterone is decreasing, because sometimes with these shifts, like we might not be ovulating. That's how we produce progesterone. And so with that, it can impact estrogen and the balance between those two. And so a lot of those things that happen, we can see in symptoms like weight gain, breast tenderness, mood swings. Things can just kind of feel off, if that makes sense. Because the ovaries are kind of slowing down, we could start to see like brain fog, cognition not being as sharp. Even digestion can take a change. So these are some of the things that can kind of start happening maybe in this first phase. And then by the second phase, which, still in perimenopause, it would be about 45 to 48 years of age. And this is usually like the most predominant stage of perimenopause, that maybe you would think like, oh, this is what everybody's been talking about. Like all of those things that I mentioned, they will just become more prevalent. And so your cycle definitely won't have the same rhythm. Maybe you might have like breakthrough bleeding or heavier bleeding. You might be skipping cycles, sleep issues. Like basically a lot of the things that I spoke about in the first phase, they just become more amplified in this second phase. And so I think the reason why everybody is sort of different when it comes to these different phases is that there are other things that have to be taken into consideration whenever we're thinking about this, that play into it. These are things like lifestyle, genetics, and how our genes are expressed, which is epigenetics. Cellular health, environment, stress can play a huge role in basically how our body is taking to these changes. Like every woman is going to go through the changes, but it kind of just depends on how our body accepts those changes, I guess, or works through those changes as far as what symptoms we might feel and then when we might go through these changes. And so something like estrogen production really slows down And this is where your adrenal health really matters, and your liver health really matters, your gallbladder, your gut. Like all of these things really matter when you think about how well maybe you're going to go through this shift. And so whenever our hormones kind of slow down a little bit, they kind of change in this, our thyroid really matters in the way that our body produces energy and works through some of the different changes. And so thyroid health is a really, really big player when we think about all of this as well. And so I mentioned the first phase, the second phase. The third phase would be more like 49 to 55 years of age. And this is what we call like late perimenopause. And this is kind of obviously the last phase before you're in full-blown menopause. And to really know if you're in menopause, you would need a full calendar year where you don't have a cycle. And that's where you would really be in phase 4, which the average for the cycle to completely stop is about 52. So the average age for menopause is around 52. But I think that it's so important to consider, again, a lot of the lifestyle things that I mentioned. And that's really honestly where I like to spend a lot of my time and focus when I work with clients is let's talk about all the things that influence how our body is going to process these changes. Again, these are things like adrenal health, liver, gallbladder, gut health, thyroid. Like all of those are the big players when you think about why does somebody do better maybe in going through this change than others? Why are some people struggling so bad when it comes to these types of symptoms that, hot flashes, the weight gain, the irritability, like those are 3 that I hear a lot. It's because of the things that I just mentioned. And so those are the things that, again, this is going to happen whether we like it or not, right? Our body is going to go through these changes whether we like it or not. What can we do to help the situation be better, help our body go through these changes better? We can work on adrenal, liver, gut, thyroid. Like we can work on all of these systems to help take the load off of them, help make sure our body has what it needs to function properly. So these systems work like we want them to. And so our body is really primed and ready to go through these changes. And so, when I think about what's normal, I just shared, the different phases and what kind of is happening in our body. Like things are shifting, different hormones are shifting. Certainly, we have to think about it's kind of like a second puberty. And when we think about puberty is very much a building up of the hormones in our body. It's building up our body to ultimately be ready to give birth, obviously way later than when we start puberty. But that's really what the shifts are moving towards when you think about puberty. Basically, the opposite is sort of happening whenever we're moving into menopause and we're going through perimenopause. It's kind of a rewind. Our body is more in a catabolic state than an anabolic state. That means a tearing down versus a building up. And I don't mean that in a negative way, like these things are trying to tear down my body. No, it's just a phase that we all go through, just like we all went through puberty. And just like puberty isn't just a one-time event. I think sometimes whenever, a young girl starts her cycle, like we say she's been through puberty, but actually puberty is about, whenever probably even a year or 2 before she starts her cycle, all the way up to 18 to 20. So it's more of like a 8 to 10 year span versus like a one-time event. And sort of the same thing can be said for perimenopause. It's definitely a more of a 10-year thing versus a 1 to 2 year thing. And so just looking at it like that can really help us to be able to work with our body and not be scared by these changes and really just go into this season. If you're I'm right here with you. I'm 40. So if you find yourself at that age and you're just kind of anticipating all these changes like in a negative way, I would encourage you to shift that thinking and just, whenever things start to shift, look at it in a positive way of like, how can I support my body better? Even if you've been doing the same things for years and years and they've worked great and now they're not seeming to work right, don't look at that as a negative thing. Just go with the flow, right? Look at that as a positive way to just support your body differently and just be more informed about what's going on, and that this is completely normal. This is not, your body's not broken. Your body is not, it's not beyond repair. Like, these things are normal. However, we can help our body go through this change in a better way, in a smoother way, let's say. And so grace is needed. Perspective is everything when you think about the changes that are coming. And this is an opportunity to just step into the next season with grace instead of just, all this scarcity and confusion and even dread, And so one thing to note on this is that the things that can make this a little bit more confusing to the body is if there are synthetic hormones at play. So like birth control pills, shots, patches, different things like that. Like, they can impact detox pathways and elimination pathways, which are really big key when you think about hormonal balance, because we're going to talk about this in an upcoming episode about what does detox have to do with hormones. Our body makes a hormone, uses a hormone, and then it has to detox it out. And so if our detox pathways aren't working properly, that is going to be another thing that is going to affect all the organs that I mentioned earlier that play a huge part in our hormone balance. And so that's going to be really, really key. I'm also in an upcoming episode going to talk about some of the testing that you might want to think about in relation to hormones, but also other things as you age. I think that's really a great thing to think about and just be informed about, because really you play a big part in not getting dismissed by, your doctor, whether that's in the more natural realm or in the conventional space, as far as some of these symptoms popping up and what can you do about it as you do age. I think it's really important to be aware of all these things so that you can, be proactive in your health and really get on top of these things so that you can optimize some of these pathways so that you can go through this shift in the best way possible. And so I'm going to be talking about some of those on a few future episodes. So if that interests you, keep your eyes peeled. I hope that you've enjoyed this episode and just this maybe mindset shift and way of thinking as you get older. What's normal with hormonal changes and what can I do about it, and just not dreading things, right? Perspective really is everything when you think about this. So thank you so much for joining me on this episode, and I'll see you on the next one.